Welcome back. No doubt this past election produced some big numbers. According to those who count the cash, outside groups spent nearly $300 million total on the midterm elections. That's outside groups. That's about 4 times what they spent in 2006. But who says that? A lot of people, campaigns, and the news media included, put their faith in a website called opensecrets.org. OpenSecrets.org is a nonprofit, and they say a nonpartisan group, that gathers all available campaign filings and digests and analyzes the data on their webpage. The site has become the authority in the increasingly murky world of campaign finances, especially the outside secret money contributions. Dave Levinthal is the editor of OpenSecrets.org's blog.
You can talk about money in general terms, but when you get down to the matter, this kind of money is a certain type of money. It's a very critical type of money because in politics, not all types of money are created equal. Some is going to go for paper clips and pencils. Well, others of it is going to go to tear down a candidate in the most violent of political terms.
Well, did the amount of outside money, that's the money that doesn't have to be accounted for, impact the outcome of the elections?
We feel that it did, and our preliminary analysis shows that about 2/3 of the races in which outside money was a factor, the winner of that race received a greater benefit from the outside money than the loser did. That means that either the winner got outside money promoting him or her, or that person's opponent was receiving more negative advertising against him or her.
Well, how did you reach a conclusion that the outside money impacted the 2010 midterms as much as you say it did?
Because we could see in certain races that it had a very demonstrable effect, and perhaps no better example, at least at this juncture, than what happened up in Alaska during the primaries. A single organization, it was a Tea Party organization called Our Country Deserves Better PAC, went in and spent hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars in just the final couple of days before that primary was actually waged. And then something happened that almost never happens in politics. A hitherto unknown challenger defeated a Republican incumbent in a partisan primary, that being Lisa Murkowski. Now, in the end, she may end up winning the ultimate election because she ran as a write-in candidate. But at least for that primary, the odds of an incumbent being defeated in a primary by a challenger are almost nothing. And yet this organization came in, bought up all the airwaves, spent an incredible amount of money for an Alaska Senate race, and Joe Miller ended up beating Lisa Murkowski by just a hair's breadth.
In the Republican primary?
In the Republican primary.
Well, why should I care about that?
You should care about it because if you, as a voter, care about who you're electing, you probably want to know who is supporting the people who are running in a particular election. You probably want to care about the people who that candidate is associating with. And if you don't have a complete picture, if you don't get a picture in all of its various colors as to who's truly behind that, then you're going to be limited in your knowledge of who to support. You're going to be limited in your ability to make an informed decision.
But if I'm a member of the Tea Party, let's just take this example. Say, listen, it wasn't the money so much. It was the idea that people had a gut full of the way government was operating. It was our policy, if you will, that carried us through to that primary election victory over a well-established Republican incumbent. And this business of money, well, money is always important. We use money like everybody else, but the key thing here is it isn't the money, it's the idea, it's what we stood for. How do you react to that?
Certainly that's a valid argument to some level. Money is not everything, but money certainly is an important factor in many of these races. You can't get a message out. You can't inform what is a huge American public if you don't have the ability to have a megaphone in front of your mouth. If you're just blowing into the wind, well, nobody's going to hear you. But if you have the ability to blanket the airwaves, if you have the ability to get your message out to a mass audience, then you're probably going to be a lot more successful at disseminating your message than you would if you're just on the street corner shouting at people as they pass by.
Right. What about the argument that goes along these lines? Listen, it's all well and good to talk about big money and secret money, But there's so many variables go into an election, and particularly this 2010 election, that it's a little early and maybe a little much to say that this flood of money actually made a big difference.
We found that in the majority, roughly 2/3, and the numbers may change when we get final reports in, but in roughly 2/3 of instances where this outside money was a factor in a congressional election, the candidate who benefited from that money, the candidate who is either receiving more positive ads in his or her favor or more negative ads against his or her opponent, ended up winning. So if it was 50-50, then that might be a valid argument. But the fact that we're seeing a significant majority of candidates winning who were receiving a good bit of outside money is an indication to us that even if this is not the overriding factor in candidates winning and losing, it certainly is among some of the important factors.
What's the answer? I mean, to someone in the living room again who says, God, I hate all this. Whether you're Republican, Democrat, Tea Party, or Mugwump, you say, we can't keep going this way. More and more expensive elections, more and more secret money on all sides going into it. What's the solution?
Well, first, there are two schools of thought to this. There's a camp that says, well, this is not necessarily a bad thing, that spending money on politics is tantamount to speech, and that if you have a lot of money, you should be able to spend a lot of money on politics to promote the candidate or promote the party that you want to promote. Fair enough.
Even if you do it in secret?
Well, that's where we come in and we say, well, that's fine. We don't have a stance one way or another on the actual system in place. What we feel is important is that whatever the system is, whatever the rules and regulations are, that transparency is a critical element to it. Because if you don't know who is spending money to advocate for or against politicians, who is bankrolling politicians, then at the end of the day, you do not know who truly is supporting politicians and who will come with their hand open once a politician gets elected and say, remember all those hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars I supported you with? Well, I'd like some payback here.
How did the outside money affect the overall tone of the election campaign?
It makes the tone incredibly more negative. It definitely allows for the fueling of attack ads that are going to try to tear down a candidate, much more so than promote a candidate. So while this money will definitely go toward the advertisements that promote a candidate, that lovingly cast them in a very rosy glow, most of it's going to go toward the mean, nasty, dirty, some people would say unscrupulous advertisements that make this political process as we have it here and now probably a lot nastier than it was even just 5 or 10 years ago.
Well, which races attracted the most outside money and why?
The races that attracted the most outside money tended to be one of two things, or both. A Senate race, because more media markets, more money, and competitive races, ones where the Democrats definitely had a seat to lose and the Republicans had a seat to win, or it was an open seat. So specifically, the Nevada Senate race. Harry Reid versus Sharon Angle ended up attracting a considerable amount, 8 figures worth of outside money. The Colorado Senate race, where Michael Bennet just won by the skin of his teeth, ended up attracting a heck of a lot of outside money too. California, Florida, Connecticut to a lesser degree.
Wisconsin?
Wisconsin did, and Illinois did. Missouri did. These are all races that were competitive, that were either open seats or where the challenger was somehow embattled and outside groups got a taste in their mouth that, hey, we got an opportunity here.
Let me ask you, what are the chances, if you think any, that we in the press and various political entities, say the Democratic Party in this election, overstated to the public the effect of this Supreme Court decision?
I don't think there's any overstatement about the effect. The results are, however, a bit curious. Initially, when the Citizens United decision came down, the thought was that corporations were, in fact, going to directly inject millions, even tens of millions of dollars of cash.
Which they now have a right to do.
Which they do have a right to do, and there are very limited examples of where they did do this, but primarily what they ended up doing in the end game was keep that veil of anonymity in place and take the money that they had and effectively do an end around, send it through groups that had very sometimes innocuous sounding names, but yet had a very conservative or a very liberal bend to them, and they played politics with it. So as a practical matter, if you're watching television, if you're listening to the radio, and you heard some ad paid for by Americans for Peace, Love, and Joy, well, you don't know how many Americans are behind that effort. You wouldn't know necessarily whether it was 1 or 1 million. You wouldn't know if corporate money or union money is flowing into it. And it's sort of as if a message from the heavens was raining down on America and telling you to do something, but you didn't know exactly who that was.
Well, we've seen outside groups raise a lot of money anonymously and run attack ads before. That's not something that just happened in 2010. What was different in these midterm elections about the ability to pour money into a key race that might be close with heavy negative ads? Or was there anything different?
Yeah, the ability to take unlimited contributions from unions and corporations and other special interests, as well as individuals, really just widened that channel of money that could flow into the political system. So we saw a number of groups take advantage of that new regulation, and also the peeling back of any time limits in which you could have a certain type of message. And there's lots of different, very arcane rules and regulations, but the bottom line is that that channel was widened, and many, many organizations, particularly conservative organizations, took advantage of those new rules.
And true or untrue that the Republicans, for whatever reason, started earlier with more money than the Democrats. There's this theory that the Republicans got started back last spring and early summer, and the Democrats really didn't get in high gear until maybe after Labor Day.
They definitely started gearing up earlier, and especially when it came to the outside money that was in play in this race, they absolutely were quicker to the punch than the Democrats and the liberal-leaning groups ever could be or hoped to be. And what that did, in reality, is just give them an opportunity to hit harder, hit faster, get involved earlier, and as a result, try, at least, to permeate the psyches of Americans so that they could paint the Democrats as they wanted to paint the Democrats. They could promote the Republican candidates that they were supporting in the way that they wanted to.
Now, for Mr. Regular Viewer, who says, well, it sounds to me like the Republicans were more alert, faster to pick up on how things had changed, got their act together earlier and better than the Democrats, and so what's wrong with that?
It's politics, and for a lot of people, there's nothing wrong with it. Certainly, the Democrats and the Republicans are in constant competition, and sometimes the Republicans are going to be quicker to the punch. Sometimes the Democrats are going to be quicker to the punch. But what we see right now in just the couple of days after the election is concluded is that Democrats are having some regrets. There was a wonderful story in the LA Times just today that was talking about how Democratic fundraisers are just kicking themselves over the fact that they weren't quite as aggressive as Republicans were and are now vowing to do the very same things, use the very same techniques that Republicans were using this previous election cycle.
And that means for 2012, there's going to be bigger money, even more money spent, keeping in mind there's $4 billion approximately spent in this midterm election. Going to be more money spent, going to be more secret money, less ability to find out who gave what to whom, and the game just keeps rising?
You think it's wild now? Wait a couple of months. Wait half a year. When the Iowa caucuses and the New Hampshire primaries are in the public consciousness for the first time. Wait until presidential candidates are running across the country trying to do as much as they can, as fast as they can, to promote their names. And of course, by any expectation, you are going to have a very, very competitive Republican primary going ahead to 2012. Plus, you have all the congressional elections that you will have in 2012 on top of it.
And that comes into play with not to pick on anybody, with a BP or Exxon or a big pharmaceutical company or a big television media network or a big union.
All of the above. And it doesn't matter if you are a Democrat or a Republican, a liberal or conservative. Both sides do play this game. Now, some may have played it better than others this previous election cycle, but certainly as competition will dictate, the other side is going to be pretty quick to realize that they are on the business end of the situation and they're going to play catch-up.
Dave Levinthal of OpenSecrets.org. Straight ahead now in our program, negative ads on the screen long before television. Some history and thoughts to ponder, so stick in here with us.